On behalf of the City of Yonkers Parks Department and the Untermeyer Gardens Conservancy, welcome to the new year. Looking at the new year, I was talking with our founder and president, Steve Burns, who was asking me a few questions about exactly how I got here, and I thought it might be fun to share that with you, since we're in a period where I can't talk a lot about plants at the moment. One influence as a young man I think that did really play on me is my mother's parents, Henry and Dorothy, who had a farm outside of Kansas City where they raised chickens. They had a big egg business. The farm sign, the Little Malabar farm sign, said Christmas trees as well, although by the time I was a young man there weren't many Christmas trees around. But I think the influence of spending a lot of time on that farm had a bigger role in my career path than I ever would have imagined, certainly at the time. When I went to school at the University of Missouri, a big land-grant school with a giant ag department and fairly progressive in that matter, I started studying, of all things, public relations and advertising. While that might have served me well on some level, had I been paying attention, I was not paying attention. I took a semester, maybe 2 semesters off, regrouped, and started studying the plant sciences. I looked at a botany course, which was fascinating to me, and really got interested in plant genetics, which is where I was headed. But then the summer between what would have been my sophomore and junior year, I took an internship at Powell Botanical Gardens, which at that time was a young public garden outside of Kansas City, Missouri, near my grandparents' farm. And in addition to working with my grandfather, who was the very first volunteer for Powell Gardens, I was able to see sort of the art and the science of plants being combined. One of the biggest compliments I ever got was the first day I worked with my grandfather, who was concerned about the fact that he endorsed me for this internship. I'd had maybe a rough-ish teenage years and a little bit of insolence, perhaps. And he was a bit concerned, but after the first day we worked together in the garden, he turned to me and said, "You are a good worker. I'm proud of you." And I think that also put me on my career path. But it was one night where I was at the garden. I got to live in the garden in addition to work there all day. And it was a very stormy year. The Mississippi and the Missouri rivers were doing historic flooding through the year. But that meant every night, or almost every night, I got to see these magnificent thunderstorms roll across the horizon from Kansas into Missouri after a day of working in the garden, and realized, probably my only epiphany in life, that if this were the worst my career was going to get as an intern at a young botanical garden, that I was going to be pretty happy with my career, something my dad told me I should pay a lot of attention to. So with that in mind, I went back to the University of Missouri, withdrew my interest in plant genetics, and started studying ornamental horticulture. I had some instrumental professors helping me with plant ID and plant science, but one particular landscape design professor would take us out into the woods once a month at least, and we spent a week in the Ozarks as well, just looking at plants and trees and rivers and rocks, and how those things existed in nature. And I think that this day, that informs how I look at gardens. I went back to school and graduated and knew I wanted to get to either the East or West Coast. I was leaning toward the East Coast just because of the history of gardening out here, and ended up quite sure I was already in Ohio from Missouri in my U-Haul, moving to New Jersey, where I was able to have an internship at Willowwood Arboretum. It was a garden that was run by Richard Hartledge, who gave me an opportunity to come work there. And while I had applied at Longwood and some of the other big gardens on the East Coast, I was not accepted, but Richard brought me in, and I'm so glad he did. Richard's an amazing plantsman and world-class designer, and shared a lot of his perspectives with me, which helped a lot. He also was well connected in the East Coast garden world and introduced me to lots of gardeners and gardens. And I think the fact that I was at a small institution and the only intern there and the only one with a real background in horticulture other than Richard, I was given more responsibility than I deserved, certainly than I had earned yet. and really gave me an interesting approach and a well-rounded approach to the very beginning of my horticultural path. In addition to seeing gardens up and down the East Coast, one that Richard took me to was the Scott Arboretum of Swarthmore College, and while I was sitting in their amphitheater, I decided that this is the next place I wanted to work. I didn't study school beyond a bachelor's, and the Scott Arboretum is a really amazing institution run by Claire Sawyers. Andrew Bunting was the curator at the time, and I told them, and I think I pulled it off, that I wanted to approach this internship as if I were approaching a master's degree. And the resources that the Scott Arboretum provided, thanks to Claire's institutional guidance and Andrew's amazing plantsmanship, I learned so much in the 2 years I was there. They kept me around for a second year as assistant curator, and Andrew also hired me on the side for Fine Garden Creations, his private design business, and I was given, again, more responsibility than I had earned and more responsibility than I deserved, but swimming in the deep end and standing on the shoulders of giants is largely how I've made it through this career.